Alternate Focus interviews Akai Sharon and Noam Kayut, both veterans of the Israeli Defense Forces. All young Israelis, male and female, with few exceptions, are required to serve 2 to 3 years of active military duty in the Israeli Defense Forces. Sharon and Kayut served during the Second Intifada, a 4-year-long bloodbath that claimed the lives of over 3,000 Palestinians and 950 Israelis. After thorough introspection, these young men have chosen to speak out about their experiences as self-described brutal occupiers of a disputed land. And Sharon and Kayut are not alone. They are members of a new forum for young Israeli Defense Forces veterans called Breaking the Silence. Now a worldwide exhibition, Breaking the Silence features photo and art displays and live speeches. Now, Sharon and Kayut share their stories.
Most of the missions that my unit was given and carried out were arrest operations, search operations, going into taking over cities or towns or villages, of course in the nighttime, and sometimes you would continue in the same place for a few days, searching, going one house to the other, searching them, taking over houses as observation points, or arresting people. And that's your routine. My routine was, or our routine was, that we never knew where we're going to be from one minute to the other. One night we could be in Nablus, the next night we could be in Gaza, the next night we could be in Hebron. And at a certain point you just lose track of where you are, who you are, and what you're doing, because you disrupt people's lives on a daily basis. And for me that was the most I think when I look at it today, when I reflect on it today, as someone who couldn't do that during your service, because you can't really, you live in a, denial way of life where you can't look at what you're doing, you can't really reflect on it. But when I reflect on it today from this perspective, I can say that that was probably for me the deepest example of corruption. Not the extreme cases where there was shooting or stuff like that, but just thinking that there were hundreds of thousands of families that couldn't have one peaceful night of sleep in their homes. I mean, who in today in the USA, in Israel, and anywhere else would be willing to live like that? Not knowing if at 2 o'clock in the morning 20 soldiers will take over your house for a week. Not knowing, sitting in your living room and suddenly hearing smashing on the wall, and there is a hole in the wall, and suddenly 20 soldiers come to visit. And for me that was routine.
In the newspaper I saw an article about confiscation, car keys confiscation, when you detain car to enforce curfew, when you detain cars because they just passed the line that close to a checkpoint, whatever. And it's not the article and the soldier that brought out more or less 100 car keys and brought it to the press, but the response of the spokesman, of the IDF, the spokesman of the IDF, that said, this is an extreme case, a rotten apple, it will be checked, examined, and won't happen again. And now I gave the order to take Palestinian car keys and to detain cars hundreds of times in my unit. I saw in the West Bank boxes full of car keys and IDs that were taken and were supposed to be returned, and then I know my father read the newspaper before me, and I know that he believes. I mean, he's from a different generation where things maybe were better, or when people could believe the system, and he really thinks that this is an extreme case that won't happen again. And for me, it was a point of understanding that I'm not backed for what I did, and I didn't do it for fun. I got my orders. I thought it was okay. I thought I was a part of a system that protects Israel from terror attacks, and then I understand that just a game of keeping information inside and not letting anybody know. And how can you criticize? How can you ask questions? And that was maybe one of the first times that I asked what's going on here.
One time when we finished an operation in Nablus, and it was really destructive. We were 5 or 6 days straight in Nablus with a lot of IDF forces, tanks, and APCs, and it was very destructive. I mean, the whole infrastructure of the city was torn up. There was a lot of houses that were either damaged or even destroyed, and there was a lot of shooting, mostly by the IDF, into the city. And when we got out of there, the first thing that happened when we left the city, got back to the army barrack, was I heard a radio news flash, which happens every hour in Israel, and it was going like, IDF forces left Nablus after a search and arrest operation, found this and that, and that's it. And I think that even then I suddenly realized my parents are now sitting at home, they're listening to the radio, and they're sure that here we are, their heroes, their son, they sent, found weapons and ammunition and did this and that and so important things to defend this country, but they don't know the truth. They don't know that 99% of what we did there was destroy people's property, destroy their lives, but no one told them that. And I think, like Noam, when he just realized what where the truth is and where it's going, today I can say that was one time that I really started to think of how the reality is being kept, under the surface, hidden from the public.
You hear the radio or news and TV saying IDF forces returned fire to sources of fire. Now you know that we were shooting everywhere. You know that there is no such thing in daylight, sources of fire in urban areas, and
in nighttime.
You know that you can't really, from a barrack far away, you can't really see most of the time the exact place you're shooting at, and that sources of fire, which as a soldier you know that it's just a title, good for the news, but and this dissonance, we didn't hear it while serving.
I want to give you one example of something that we've exposed also in the press in Israel and in foreign press a few months ago about a revenge attack that was launched by the IDF after one night in February 2002. Two terrorists from the Islamic Jihad attacked an IDF checkpoint and killed 6 IDF soldiers. The same night, the Chief of Staff, the Minister of Defense, not some sergeant at a checkpoint, this is policy right from the top, decided to launch a revenge raid against Palestinian officers, some of them just traffic officers, all around the West Bank and Gaza. The next day, 15 Palestinian officers were dead, were reported dead. And we spoke with 5 different soldiers and officers in 2 different units that were part of these raids and part of the attacks on 4 different checkpoints in different areas, geographically had no connection whatsoever to the place that was attacked by the night on the IDF checkpoint. No connection. One was in Nablus, one was near Ramallah, and they just attacked, and the orders were just go there, shoot to kill. And in the briefing by the commanders, by the high-ranking commanders of units, brigade commanders, they were told that this is revenge. We are going to revenge the blood of our soldiers. So when you ask me where it comes from, this was not some spontaneous 19, 20-year-old kid that losed his mind, that went out of control for a second and slapped someone. This was policy. People sat down in offices, convenient, comfortable offices, and decided to kill people as revenge. And the next day, 15 people were reported dead that had no connection whatsoever to the attack on the IDF. So when we have to, and we exposed this. And then, we weren't expecting something dramatic to change, because when people ask me, don't you think something should happen? Of course I think something should happen. But do you really think that the Israeli public or someone will be brave enough to say that the Minister of Defense has to be investigated? That the Chief of Staff has to be investigated? This is not a 19, 20-year-old or even a lieutenant that should be investigated. This is the system. This is the government. This is the policy. The story behind Breaking the Silence and what it's trying to do is that one day in March 2004, a young guy, a month before his discharge, woke up in the morning and found out that he can't look at himself in the mirror. That guy's name was Yehuda Shaul. He's the founder of Breaking the Silence. And he started to talk with his friends, with people that were his soldiers, his commanders, especially about Hebron. He served 14 months in Hebron in the Second Intifada. And that evolved into a exhibition of pictures taken by soldiers, not photographers, not journalists, just pictures that, 18, 19-year-olds took for memories. And we took that out of photo albums, presented over 60 of them with over 60 soldiers giving video testimonies about their Hebron service. And that evolved from there to what it is today, a much bigger group of soldiers that served all around the occupied territories as conscripts or as officers in the Second Intifada. And we've interviewed over 300, mostly discharged, some still in service, soldiers in the IDF. And the message, or what we're trying to do with all this, is when we were discharged, the first thing, the fundamental thing that we all felt was the amazing distance or gap of information between what is really going on in the occupied territories, what we're really doing over there, and what is known back home to our parents, to our neighbors, to our public figures and leaders, what is told by the press, what is told by the IDF. And we felt a moral obligation as much as a social obligation as people who grew up in Israel, did their military service, who love their country and are very, very concerned about how we will look tomorrow, how we will raise our children tomorrow, because we don't want to see ourselves anywhere else. And out of that concern, we felt the moral obligation of bringing that information, the true stories of what we're doing in the occupied territories, to the public and raising a true public debate on all platforms. Press, politicians, everywhere you can think of, about the real corruption, the moral corruption that is happening in the occupied territories, the price of sending more and more generations to be occupiers.
Breaking the Silence tried to fight a code of silence which has many aspects. First of all, and the most important one as we see it, is the personal one. When you stand in a post or in a checkpoint, and I commanded Kalandia checkpoint between Jerusalem and Ramallah, where almost 3,000 Palestinians cross every day, and your job, even if you don't want to do it, you stop people from living the life that they should have. You take their freedom to go to work, you take their freedom to go to university, and many times, even if you don't want to do it, you humiliate people, you make them stand in line for hours, and when you go back home after a month of doing it, you have a weekend break, you don't come home to your girlfriend or to your mother and say, hey, the day before yesterday I saw somebody more or less your age, mommy, and I let her wait in the sun for 5 hours because I didn't have a permission to let her pass. I mean, that daily life of occupation, of controlling people, is the first aspect of the silence code. Breaking the silence is a personal process. It's something, first of all, it's not an easy thing to look at yourself in the mirror and see what you really have done, and the other side, it's a very good feeling to feel a hero, to talk about the fights, the times that you were fighting terrorists and that you saw them, but realizing the damage for the population, realize the hatred that you've created, is a hard thing.